If you don't mind by just telling us your first name.
Yeah, I'm Nikki.
Nikki?
Yeah.
Awesome. Just to get us started, what were some of your dreams as a child?
Oh gosh. My biggest dream was to be a firefighter.
Firefighter.
Yeah, I wanted to be a truck, but my parents made me kind of change that because you're like, you can't be an inanimate object. But the concept behind it is I wanted to be loud and bold with whatever I did.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I've always looked up to firefighters. I've always looked up to the cops that served our community. And so I wanted to be part of their, group. And obviously life took a different turn, but yeah, that was my biggest thing. I wanted to be a fire truck.
Just going still with that childhood,
Yeah.
if you could talk a little bit about, your upbringing and then also your relationship with your parents.
Yeah, so my upbringing was really, really traumatic. So there was a lot of untold secrets in my family. I don't talk to my parents now. I think that's probably one of the most uncomfortable conversation to have with people sometimes, just because I'm like, oh my gosh, you have such a great family, but I don't. But very traumatic. My mom was very verbally abusive, and my dad was abusive in different ways. And so spent a lot of my childhood very introverted, very just wanting to hide from the world. And that kind of came into play when I was like, okay, well, what do I want to be when I grow up? I want to be able to have that confidence to be bold and to be confident and to be known for my name and by my name. So grew up in a very Hindu household, and that ended up changing, became agnostic before going to college, atheist by the time I got to college. So I graduated at 17 from high school, grew up in Illinois, and then went to Kansas State for college and never turned back. So progressively moved south. But yeah, so relationship with my parents is currently non-existent. My mom's still in Illinois and my dad is in Texas. And then my biological dad, who was an absolute godsend, passed away in December, but I got to know him about 3 years ago, and he was just the light of the world. Loved Jesus, was a doctor, and just truly served people. And I think just everything that I was missing growing up, he was that as an adult, and for the time that I had him in my life as an adult. So that was super cool to kind of just receive.
How did that make you feel having him, and then looking back at the relationship you had with your biological parents and comparing those two, as far as how you felt?
Yeah, I was really conflicted because I felt like I should reach back out to my parents, but I knew that toxicity was so hard, and it would only take me back into a darker place. Whereas talking to my bio dad, with everything that I struggled with, and he was like, okay, well, here's how we're gonna do it. And it was never just a me walk, it was an us walk. And so just having that companionship and having that role model to kind of look up to for once was amazing, instead of looking to my friends' families and all of that. So yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. What were some of the things that you kind of touched on a little bit that you learned from him and your parents, or maybe even family in general?
Yeah.
Some things you could just take away from that you carry with you.
For me, I think the biggest life lesson is just to always, keep your eyes forward, stay steadfast in whatever fight you're fighting. I think growing up, I never realized I lost my best friend to suicide when I was a sophomore in college, or in high school. I'm sorry, and I didn't know what depression was. I didn't know what anxiety was. That was my introduction into it, and I was like, I don't know if I feel this way, but I have a lot of reasons that would compound those feelings. And so I remember I was sitting with my bio dad and his wife and all of my siblings last summer. I was just sitting and talking to them. I was like, I never faced those demons. And so as an adult, learning how to cope, I just remember my dad just being like, just keep going forward. He's like, that sounds so cliche and insensitive, but when you keep taking those steps forward, you find less and less reasons to look back and take those steps backwards. So I think that's just been my biggest thing, is just constantly looking forward and taking those steps forward.
What are some ways that you've been going forward recently and applying that?
So I really struggled with opioid addiction after an injury in college. Tore my meniscus in my right knee, and then it kind of just went downhill from there. About 4 years ago, I started this battle with alcohol, and just really struggling with not knowing how much I could drink versus how much I wanted to drink. And so recently I was like, you know what, I'm done. Anything that has a grip on my life, that takes the place of my time of worship or my time of peace or progression, doesn't belong in my life. Anything that takes me back to toxicity doesn't belong in my life anymore. So for me, it's just slowly narrowing like what is beneficial, and not just like momentarily, but long term.
Yeah, awesome. Tell us about your first love and the emotions you felt with it.
So I was married when I was 24. So this was almost 6 years ago, and ended up getting divorced a while later. But I think for me, it was, a lot of people asked about my divorce, and it was, when we met, he loved me more at 23, 24, and I loved myself more when we were getting divorced. And just going through that relationship, it taught me a lot about love. It taught me how to love myself on a deeper level. It taught me how to love those in my life on a completely deeper level, and to trust and to evolve and to just go down this journey of self-care and self-reflection, but also just vulnerability. And so, yeah, he's a person and he's always going to be a part of my life, but just in different ways. And he's still someone I love, even though we have, kind of gone our own ways, and we're going to continue to go our own ways. Mm-hmm. But for me, it's no bridge is burned unless a match is taken to it, right? Mm-hmm. And I think you can walk away from certain relationships knowing, hey, you weren't good for me in this season of life, but that doesn't mean you're not a good person. Mm-hmm. And so just really seeing the good and the beauty in everyone you interact with, I think that was just the biggest and honestly the most humbling lesson I could have walked away with from that.
Yeah.
So
everything in the past is a lesson,
right?
You look at it. How would you define love?
Oh gosh. So one of my favorite quotes is from Jordan Peterson, and it's, "Love is the best of me serving the best of you." And Christ revealing his truth through all of that. And it was on an episode with Africa Brooks, okay, who struggled with sobriety and started her sobriety from alcohol like 6 different times. And her 7th time, she's like, I'm doing this for real. But, love is the best of me serving the best of you. And no matter where you are in life through that, right? Mm-hmm. Because Christ doesn't define his love based on how low you are. And so if I'm at my lowest and I'm still trying my hardest to love you, and you're returning that love to me, that's going to take me out of that love or that mm-hmm. low point in life, right? Mm-hmm. And so for me, that's just, it's unconditional. It's forgiving. It's humbling. Mm-hmm. And it's imperfect, mm-hmm. because we are very, very flawed human beings. So
when you commit to loving Christ more, do you feel more love in return?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think just going through like peaks and valleys of depression and, being like, God, like I need you. And Matthew 11:28, where he talks about his yoke and how his burden is light. It's whenever I'm on my knees in my most vulnerable state, God's like, okay, like let's go, because I'm going to show you something really, really awesome. And when I'm at my highest of highs and I'm still pursuing that adamant and steadfast love, God's like, okay, we're going to go even higher. Like, is that possible? Is it possible? And it goes back to, constantly looking forward and just constantly saying, hey, yeah, I made a mistake. How do I fix it? And God's like, I'm gonna show you how you heal from it. I'm going to forgive you through whatever mistake you think you don't deserve to be forgiven from. And mm-hmm. it's just amazing.
It's awesome feeling. Can you talk about what a good day looks like for you?
Oh gosh. It's honestly the days I don't drink. It really is. It's the days where I don't feel like I have to be loud and like someone else and boastful and all of these things because I'm under the influence of alcohol or, I've not even just under the influence, but I've had a drink and I'm like, okay, yeah, well, I can go do whatever and be whomever because I feel, a lack of inhibition at this point. And so for me, it's just those days where I feel like I don't have to have control, but it's not because of the substance. It's because I truly don't have to have control mm-hmm. because I can't. So. On
the opposite end, can you talk about maybe bad days or when you feel like uneasy in your heart, and how you push through that.
Yeah. So Sunday scaries are definitely a thing because it's followed by Monday chaos. But just, getting to work, I started a new job in January. And so getting to work for like these last few weeks, just on Monday, I'm like, okay, like, what if I don't know how to respond to an email yet? Or what if I don't know how to do X, Y, and Z? I just remember I was sitting at my desk. It was, I think, like 2 weeks ago. And one of my colleagues comes up to me. He's like, are you okay? I was like, I just feel stupid and I feel like I'm failing and I just don't feel like I'm good enough right now. And he's like, everyone makes mistakes. Like, it's okay to come into work on a Monday and feel completely overwhelmed. He's like, all of us do. He's like, don't try and make mistakes. Like, don't purposely go out and do it. He's like, learn from them. And so, for me, it's getting past the anxiety of going into work on a brand new work week. And I remember this morning I walked into work and I was like, nothing seems absolutely pressing where I just can't take a moment to set my stuff down, to get coffee, to get water, and settle in before I start going and messaging people for things I need, or responding to messages I didn't check over the weekend. And so I think for me, it's just those days where I feel the most anxious are probably the days I need to have like the most conversations, if that makes sense.
What does that anxiety, like anxiousness, like feel like for you?
Oh, I just feel like my entire world is collapsing and I think I'm going to get fired, or I'm going to lose like the place I live, or, and it's just nothing gets compounded more than my worst fears on the days I'm the most anxious.
It's a negative spiral.
It's a negative spiral. And it's hard, but by the end of the day, I'm out of it. And I feel great. I'm like, okay, today was a successful day. It didn't suck. But, and I make mistakes. And I think just being human and feeling like, oh my gosh, I made a mistake and I failed. But talking to my bosses, having those conversations and expressing how I feel. Not every single time I feel that way, because those conversations do get redundant after a while. But just being like, okay, like here's where I made a mistake, here's where I'm going to improve on. And so it honestly just depends on the day and how much coffee I've had. Because coffee exacerbates it.
Yeah, and with your faith, does that help you in those moments of anxiousness?
Yeah, I think when I started to acknowledge depression and started to kind of like get a glimpse of it in my own life. I was a sophomore in college. And I just remember I was sitting with a friend and we're sitting in the like hallway wing of one of the dorms. He's like, when I feel attacked or whatever, it's in the name of Jesus, like Satan, take a hike. Like, get lost. And it's still something like I'll whisper to myself every now and then. Or it's like, Jesus, like, I need you. Like, no one needs you more than I do today. And that sounds selfish, but it's also very, very true. Because I can pray for everyone around me, but if I'm not praying for myself, my cup's empty. And so for me, just to be able to pour out into my community and my colleagues and my friends and whomever I'm around, it's taking that minute and being like, Jesus, like, let your words fill this room. Let it not be mine. And let your thoughts fill my mind and my actions and consume me. And so it's really cool watching what he does throughout the day.
Wow. What's been a humbling experience for you?
It was actually this past Friday. It was once again like that battle with alcohol, like not knowing what would happen. And I might get a lot of hate for this, but I ended up drinking after driving. And I just remember I pulled over at a gas station because I thought I hit a curb. And I just smelled something like terrible. And I was like, I ripped open a tire, like, oh my gosh. And so outside, like I pull into the gas station pump, I'm like looking at my trunk, or like looking at my phone real quick, and I look up and I just see lights. And I'm like, this is how it ends today. Like, I'm done.
This was last week?
This was last week. And I remember freaking out for a second. I was like, okay, like whatever's meant to happen is gonna happen. And so two cops come over to my window and they're like, hey, are you okay? Someone called the cops saying you were swerving. I was like, I think I hit a curb and I smell something weird, and I did. Like, that was the honest to goodness truth. And I was like, I need to look at my tires because I don't know what's wrong. And I just remember, and I hope the cop who pulled me over and spent 2 hours at my place listening to me just talk after this hears this. But I just remember being like, okay, like, you know, if I stumble, if I fall, if they ask me to take a breathalyzer, like, I'm not going to fight it because there are consequences to your actions. And so my tires were fine, and one of the other cops was like, hey, you know, did you drink tonight? Like, have you been drinking tonight? I was like, I had a couple. It's more than a couple, but I had a couple. And I just, you know, he was like, okay, well, where do you live? And I was like, I'm a minute up the hill, literally a minute from home. I was like, will you guys follow me? And he's like, no, we're going to do you one better. We're going to drive you home. And that, I woke up Saturday morning and I was like, I should be in a cell right now. Like, there's no reason other than God's goodness and God's mercy where I should not be in jail right now. I remember texting my pastor Saturday night, and I was like, I messed up. And, you know, he preached at church on Sunday, like, sermon hit home, like, exactly what I needed to hear. And he's like, we need to talk. And he talked to every single person before pulling me aside. And he's like, stop doing stupid things. I was like, I'm done. Like, I never want to touch alcohol again. He's like, that's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea. And I just, you know, I was having conversations with friends, and no one yelled at me. No one told me I was a failure, which was what I was used to hearing as a kid, right? Like, you're a failure, you're not going to amount to anything. It was, hey, we're going to love you through this, and we're going to listen to your thought process, but we're not going to support it. We're going to support your decision to quit drinking. Mm-hmm. And just tying all of that together, and it was, you know, friends, like, your real friends will never support your decision to deviate. They'll listen through that thought process, but they'll support your decision to learn and grow. Mm-hmm. And, you know, just sitting and journaling this entire weekend because my mental state was gone at this point. I was like, I messed up. And God's like, I still love you. You did. He's like, but I don't promise healing. You're going to have to go through this, but I promise I forgive you. And I think just being in that moment, just hearing God's forgiveness over me was just, it was humbling. There were a lot of tears, but it was very, very humbling.
Yeah, there's a lot of pain associated when you have the shame, the guilt, the wrongdoing, the sin.
Yeah.
When you're consciously aware of that, and then you know you have to face the Lord, you know what I mean? And when you get that realization, when you allow Him to work through you, it's like, it really is like every day is a miracle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I could have hurt someone. I could have ended up in jail. And at the end of the day, I didn't hurt anyone. Like, the only person I hurt was myself. Right? And no one told me they were disappointed in me. No one yelled at me. I was like, please, someone just yell. Like, that's not going to do you any good. I think just being loved through it all was amazing.
What's been the hardest thing that you've been through?
That. No. I grew up, my mom would always tell me when God was giving people brains, I was the last one in line to receive one. And so just getting to where I'm at, you know, battling with opioid addiction and doing all of that, and not having that support when I went and would blow my entire paycheck on pills. And so having to leave my apartment and living with a family whose kids I used to babysit, and all of that, not having people, it was right around the time I moved to Austin, so almost 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. And just not having that community yet. That was the hardest part, because I was still reaching out to people who were still in college, and of course they're still friends with me to this day. Mm-hmm. But I didn't have a community here, and not having an established community was probably the hardest thing. Mm-hmm. Because I felt lost. And that was around the time where I was like, I'm done with pills, like, this isn't benefiting me. So getting clean then, and just turning my life around step by step, learning not to half-heart anything, or not to, you know, just not give it my all. That was probably really hard, just as humbling, but difficult.
Yeah. It's a whole new transition, way of living, commitment, you know, to giving your all to everything.
Yeah.
Go in your mind and think. This life event could be mental, physical, or spiritual. Any time or moment that you could relate with the word war.
I think with me, it was probably when my parents announced their divorce. I was a sophomore in college. I was on academic probation, and my dad just called me. He's like, "Your mom and I are getting divorced," and I was never close with my mom, but just that was something I had always fought for as a kid. Before I got to know Jesus, I didn't get to know Jesus until my freshman year of college.
Mm-hmm.
But I would ask my dad to divorce my mom, like cry because of how mean she was, and just watching it all come through and being like, okay, I have a brother. I have a brother who's 8 years younger than me, and he's going to be front and center for all of this. And so just kind of battling with, there's almost a sense of peace with that divorce happening, but there's a lot of guilt associated with it because I didn't cause it, but I was an advocate for it. And so dealing with Satan's lies, but also Jesus' promise of protection and salvation and sanctification through that divorce. It was hard because I wanted to celebrate it and rejoice in the peace, but there was guilt with that joy. And I think I was a lot younger then, but just knowing that you can find joy through moments of grief has been a really interesting lesson to learn. So
yeah. You said that was your sophomore year
of college.
College.
Yeah.
And you also stated, just to touch back on something you said earlier, that your best friend passed away. Was that also your sophomore year?
Of high school.
Of high school.
Yeah.
What was that like when that happened? Just having someone you have real close to you and processing.
I don't know if I ever truly did, back then. I think I became a lot more introverted. I was a very introverted person growing up, and my friends will tell you no, there's no way. Yeah. But I became even more secluded. I had friends, but none that treated me like a friend would treat a friend. And so for me, it was, how do I find myself throughout all of this? The school got a lot closer. We all really, really cared for each other at the end of the day. But I think it was trying to find myself and trying to not be angry at the world. So I lost my grandmother, so my dad's mom, about a few months later, right during finals week. And so it was so tumultuous. And I was like, okay, well, whatever happens, and I'm not really going to care anymore. So I went into this period of being agnostic and not really justifying a reason for my existence, but just blaming everything for my pain and heartache and all of that. And I think for me it was, well, if bad things happen, how do you know there's a God, right? That typical statement. And so I isolated. I became angry. I became just really, a mean person. Which was hard because I pushed a lot of people away. But I think it also did me good because I pushed a lot of people away that didn't need to be in my life. So I think that, I don't know if that answered your question.
It does. Yeah. It's deep. And then now the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
If you go into your mind and think of a moment, event, place, mental, physical, or spiritually, what you relate with the word peace.
Honestly, just a season of life. So I'll be 30 in August, but just going through it and being okay, the two people that raised me, the people who I called my parents, they no longer have a place in my mind. Their thought processes, their words, they no longer hurt me. And I'm transitioning into this season where I know God's really working, where it's even after Friday, it was I never heard those people's voices in my head. I could have, but it was having those conversations and being healthy about it and thinking through it. until someone said like, hey, I'm not going to yell at you because that's the toxicity that you're longing for. I'm like, I didn't even think of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And just growing out of this phase of, hey, you know, yeah, you push people out of your life, now it's time to push them out of your mind. And entering into that phase and longing for that phase to just continue to like proceed
Mm-hmm.
is amazing.
When you see those seasons change, and then you look back on it and you're like, what a difference
Yeah.
it was back
Yeah.
then to where you are now. Sometimes you grow and you don't feel the change, but you look
Right.
back at your habits, the way you think, you know, your conviction, and then you're like,
Yeah.
I actually have grown so much.
Yeah.
And it sounds like your prayers are getting answered and you're continuing to grow in your faith and your path.
And even if they're not my prayers, they're definitely people like who are in my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you just see God working through every little facet, and it's pretty cool.
Tell us about a truly difficult time in your life and the emotions that came with it.
I moved to Austin in February of 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my really good friends had been battling with cancer for years, since he was like 10. We were in college together. He graduated, had just had a procedure. They told him that like they got all the cancer out, and literally 13 days after I moved to Austin, he's gone. And so not being able to go back to his funeral because he's a new college graduate, couldn't really afford things, and just not being able to say goodbye, I think, was probably one of the hardest things. We had our own difficulties, we had all of that, but he was honestly my first friend in college. And so just kind of going through that, and I just remember waking up like the morning before he passed. It was the day before. I was like, God, like, do what you can do, and only what you can do. If it's a miracle, perform this miracle. If it's, you know, the miracle of getting to see him in heaven, like, do that. And it was just amazing. I don't think I've ever poured into like my relationship with Christ as much as I did like through that week. And I think it was also really hard because I'd lost the one person who I knew cared about me. And yeah, so.
Do you believe that they're in heaven?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Every birthday, every death anniversary day, like, I'll shoot him a text. He's there. He's looking down.
Now tell us about a truly joyous moment in your life and then those emotions that you feel from that.
So I went back. I was actually in Denver beginning of this month. Frisco for a couple days snowboarding, and then Denver to just be there. And I got to visit my friend who was there when I got to know Jesus, and we just had the most amazing conversations. And when I tell you, like, this kid is my best friend, like, he just is an amazing human being. And we talked about what Jesus was doing in our lives, and we talked about the people in our lives and where life has taken us throughout these 12 years. And just having these, like, God-given, like, God-created conversations, and being so open and having that vulnerability and, like, growing even closer during, like, this trip was just amazing. And, you know, for me, my friends mean the world to me. There's a level of intimacy that happens when I make my friends and when I meet friends and making friends. And it's, I want to know you, I want to know everything about you, and I want to know why this is like the way you are today.
Yeah.
I want to know your favorite color, who you grew up with, and everything. And so even when I work, I'm that way. Like, I want to know my colleagues' stories. And so Josh, my friend in Frisco, we just sat and we talked for hours. We didn't have to do anything. We could have just sat, like, on a couch somewhere and just talked for 3 days straight. But we did stuff, and it was just talking about, like, our reflections and everything that's happened. And it was just an amazing, amazing time.
How do you feel when you find someone like a friend like that, or someone where it's reciprocated, where you could be open and talk about Christ and, you know, moving in that direction, but someone that's actually willing to hear you and listen?
Yeah. I mean, it's not far and few between. I think a lot of it's that, like, introverted, like, personality me coming back out where I'm like, I don't really want to have this conversation because I don't want to make things awkward.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have those friends where you can just talk about Jesus openly and be yourself, I mean, there's nothing better than that. There really isn't.
What has inspired you and why?
I think for me, it's just seeing. So I volunteered in youth for a little bit at a church when I first moved to Texas, and now some of these, I mean, they're not kids anymore. They're adults. One of them's a youth pastor at the church I go to now, and just watching these people grow up into the like God-fearing like adults that they are has just been amazing. And it's like I wish I had the youth that they did,
Mm-hmm.
but also just knowing them for a brief moment in their youth and seeing them 7-8 years later, and watching what they're doing. I mean, gosh, how can you not be inspired by that?
Planting that seed and then seeing it
just
sprout.
just watching it grow, and these kids are just doing amazing things. They're always going to be kids.
Yeah, that's awesome. What's one of the things, if it does, what's something that keeps you up at night?
Oh gosh, I think when I'd lost my job, like anytime like something changes with work or, it just, I think that's my biggest thing. Finances have always been my biggest thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm at a point where I'm like comfortable in my finances. I'm learning how to manage, and like I'm getting better at managing and all of it. But there are certain nights where I'm like, what if my paycheck doesn't come through tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
It's like always a night before payday or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
But just, I think watching my parents go through like their own financial struggles and all of that, I think that kind of planted a seed, so to speak, in my own mind. Like, hey, like what if something doesn't happen right? Or
Right.
but of course,
If you didn't have to worry about a paycheck, what would it be that you were wanting to pursue?
oh, what a good question. Honestly, I'd probably travel. I'd probably travel a lot more than I do. And I've gotten to travel plenty, but I think I'd be a lot more intentional with the people I interacted with. Whenever I travel, like fly somewhere, I always make friends on like the plane or something. And so I want to be able to do that in different countries.
Okay.
But yeah, getting to travel and just be intentional with like the people I interact with.
Yeah. What keeps you going every day?
Well, I have a dog who doesn't ever slow down. But I think it's just realizing like there's a purpose to everything. I'm stubborn. I don't quit, but just kind of watching like the anxiety and depression and PTSD and all of that fade away. Just being like, hey, there's gonna be another tomorrow. Like, I know it. And if there's not, like, so be it.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as there is, I'm gonna be joyous through this.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, just going.
Continue to go and grow and harness the strength of Christ, and back to you feeling Him. Where do you feel like you feel Him? Like, what are some times where you've actually felt Him presence, or it could be anywhere, any place, or as abstract as.
Right. I mean, He's omnipresent, right? I think for sure this past Friday, where it's like His hand was over that entire situation. But also when I was in Colorado with my best friend, and just, watching our relationship change throughout all of that. And as I've traveled, I've gone to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and I've been to Florida, I've been to New York, and I've traveled, and I've been to Germany, and all of these places, but just being with certain people, and just very, very impactful situations. There's more than we have time for me to list.
No, we have time. We have time. Imagine if you're in the hospital today with only hours to live. What would be your regrets, if any?
Oh gosh. I think for me, it's just taking matches to certain bridges and letting them burn. I think there have been a handful of relationships that could have been preserved had I let go of my pride, had I let go of my vices or whatever. Where I'm like, hey, like I could have truly been a light in their lives, and like vice versa. And of course, there's never any ill will towards people or anything, but at the end of the day, you never want to burn a bridge. I think for me, that's just been the biggest thing is, if I were to pass tomorrow, like who's going to be at my funeral? And of course, I know there are going to be people, but there are people I miss in my life. I'm like, you were good for me in that season of life, and you loved me well, but we had to part ways, and now we have to love ourselves individually. And there are some people who we didn't end things well, and I'm like, I want to go fix that. How do I fix that? And it's just not the time to fix it. So,
yeah. For you, what is forgiveness? If you were to define it, and how do you apply that in your life?
I think for me, it's complete surrenderance and vulnerability. Admitting when you're wrong. And I think for me, it's Christ always promises forgiveness. He really does. And so taking that and exemplifying that and being like, okay, I'm going to let go of every grudge, every moment of anger that I randomly think about when I'm, working out or doing whatever. And I'm just going to forget it. Like, I don't want to hold on to it anymore. It's that relinquish of just any ounce that is holding you down.
Christ has forgiven you, but have you forgiven yourself?
Yeah.
Do you feel like there's anybody, like maybe your biological parents or anyone that you haven't forgiven, or do you feel like that's been lifted?
I think as I've gotten older, it's slowly been lifted. Forgiving people doesn't mean going and like introducing them into your lives again, right? It's loving them from afar, and I'm always going to love them because they did give me a life, right? But that doesn't mean they deserve my bank account or,
Protect your peace.
Right. So for me, yeah, I have.
Yeah.
I just think that distance is good.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
You're going to make it. You're alive and well. You're sitting here today.
It's like, make it to what?
Just reading off these questions. When it comes to, is there anything that you feel like you could change as far as flipping any potential regrets or something you want to see in this new season or coming seasons of growth?
Yeah, I think a lot of self-doubt still exists. And so, the people who I no longer talk to, regardless of if there's forgiveness or not, it's that doubt of, oh, I was never good for them anyways. And I think those are Satan's lies just continuing to plant in my life. I think just growing from that and being like, okay, like, we're not going to listen to those lies. And, I was texting my friend Josh. I was like, I don't think I'm, like, good enough for you. And he's like, stop doing that. And he's like, you are, and we're part of each other's lives, and you need to stop saying that you're not good enough. And, there are times when I'll text someone, I'm like, do you want to be friends with me? I just randomly, she's like, why? But, no, I think just growing from those seeds of self-doubt, because they exist.
What are your dreams now?
I think for me, one, I want to see at least one of my coworkers get to know Jesus. I don't have any that do, which is weird, but I left a company where a lot of my colleagues knew Jesus, and just being in a spot now where I'm not, it's like disorienting a little.
Yeah.
So if we're going to go with that one, that's my number one.
Yes.
Number two, I want to become the COO of a company. At some point, whenever that happens, wherever I'm at, I want that to be my final end career. If, it's God's plan. I think three, man, I want more dogs.
We can check that one off easy.
Right.
No, have you ever tried to have those vulnerable conversations with coworkers that don't believe in treading that water?
Not yet. I'm still pretty new, so I'm trying to find like some peace in the water before I start creating waves.
That's a good way to put it.
I need some stillness for a little bit, but
yeah.
I've thought about it and just being intentional. I've talked to some friends about like what those conversations would look like at the end of the day. But the moment hasn't been like I can't just bring it up in a meeting, right? Like, I wish I could, but at the end of the day, like, one of my biggest things is I want to see one of my colleagues get to know Jesus.
That's awesome. So, yeah. You're the co-author of your life story. The author above.
Yeah.
What's your picture perfect ending?
I'm so excited to be standing in front of those pearly white gates. But not like I want to just die today.
No, I
but
understand.
I'm not
Yeah.
afraid of that if it were to happen, right?
That's the perfect ending.
right.
We're there.
Just we're there. We're home.
Mhm.
Like I don't think I could think of anything better.
Mm-mm.
No.
How do you see everybody has their own kind of way of seeing what heaven looks like, but what is it, maybe more importantly, what do you think it'll feel like?
I think it's gonna feel a lot more joyous, a lot more peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also excited to see all of my friends that have passed, so I can go like hug them. But I think for me, I think it's just gonna be serenity. Honestly, I don't think there are words to describe it.